One of the most disorienting timeline facts in all of history is this: Cleopatra VII, the famous last queen of Egypt, lived closer in time to the moon landing in 1969 than she did to the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Cleopatra died in 30 BC. The Apollo 11 mission landed on the moon in 1969 AD, roughly 2,000 years after her death. The Great Pyramid was completed around 2560 BC, roughly 2,500 years before Cleopatra was born. She was not ancient to us in the same way that the pyramids are ancient to her. When Cleopatra walked through Giza, the pyramids were already older to her than ancient Rome is to us today. This single fact rewrites the entire intuitive map of ancient history. Our mental model of history tends to flatten time. We group ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and the medieval period into a vague blur called the past, implicitly treating all of it as roughly contemporaneous. This is a cognitive illusion created by the fact that we learn about all of these periods in the same school year, read about them in the same books, and experience them in the same museums. The pyramids, Cleopatra, Caesar, the Colosseum, they feel like they belong to the same ancient world. But Cleopatra and Julius Caesar had more historical distance from the pyramid builders than we have from the Viking Age. The pyramid builders were as distant from Cleopatra as the early Middle Ages are from us. Consider what those 2,500 years meant between the pyramid builders and Cleopatra's era. The Bronze Age rose and collapsed entirely. The Hittite Empire, the Minoans, Mycenaean Greece, entire civilizations with complex societies, writing systems, and trade networks all emerged, peaked, and vanished in the gap between Giza and Cleopatra's birth. The Sea Peoples invasion that devastated the Mediterranean. The Greek Dark Ages. The rise of Phoenician civilization and the invention of the modern alphabet. The emergence of the Persian Empire and its clash with the Greek city-states at Marathon and Thermopylae. All of this happened in the gap between the pyramid's completion and Cleopatra's birth, a gap longer than the entire span from Cleopatra to right now. What does this mean for how Cleopatra perceived her own history? When she walked through Giza, she was performing religious rituals at monuments that were as incomprehensibly ancient to her as the fall of Rome is to us. Egyptian priests in her era could not fully read the oldest hieroglyphic texts carved on some pyramid surfaces, the language had drifted that far. The engineering knowledge used to construct the pyramids had been lost for over 2,000 years by the time Cleopatra was born. She was, in a very real sense, an archaeologist of her own civilization, standing in front of structures whose creators she knew almost nothing about. The pyramids were as mysterious to her as they sometimes feel to us, because they genuinely were mysterious. The fact that Cleopatra is closer in time to us than to the pyramids is part of a broader pattern of counterintuitive historical spacing. Woolly mammoths were still alive when the Great Pyramid was being built. A small isolated population survived on Wrangel Island until 1650 BC, over 900 years after Giza's completion. The last living mammoth and the pyramid builders coexisted on the same planet. Simultaneously, if you go the other direction, the inventor of the iPhone and the last surviving American Civil War veteran were alive at the same time. History is not a smooth progression but a series of massive, asymmetric jumps that our flattened mental models completely fail to represent. Understanding true historical scale, not the flattened textbook version, forces us to recalibrate our relationship with the past. The people who built Stonehenge, who completed it roughly 5,000 years ago, had no written language, no metal tools, and no wheel. The people who built the pyramids, 1,000 years later, had all three. The gap between Stonehenge and the pyramids is larger than the gap between Julius Caesar and us. These are not incremental steps, they are revolutionary leaps separated by vast stretches of time that our minds collapse into nothing. When you stand at a museum and look at Egyptian artifacts and Greek artifacts in the same room, you are looking at things separated by the same amount of time as the Roman Empire is from the International Space Station. This is the perspective shift that changes how you read history forever. The ancient past was not one thing. It was a sequence of worlds as different from each other as our world is from theirs. Cleopatra was to the pyramid builders what we are to Attila the Hun. The Trojan War, if it happened, was to Cleopatra what William the Conqueror is to us. Medieval knights were to ancient Greece what ancient Greece is to the pyramid builders. Time does not compress, only our perception of it does. And when you correct that perception, history stops being a flat wall of old things and becomes something far more staggering, A deep hallway of worlds stretching back so far that the beginning is still lost in the dark, with each room containing a civilization that was, in its moment, just as real and just as certain of its permanence as we are of ours.